He believed intimidation was his sharpest weapon, but Martina Lori refused to be cut. A heavy wooden chair flew past her head and shattered into a dozen pieces against the brick wall behind her, yet she didn't so much as blink. He brought the knife up next, a beautiful piece of deadly art with a handle of shimmering mother of pearl. The polished steel blade came to rest just beneath her jaw, a cold, sharp promise of violence that made her skin crawl. Around them, the bar erupted into chaos as the last few late-night drinkers scrambled over each other to get to the exits, desperate to escape the unfolding danger. Through it all, Martina Lori simply stood her ground, expertly balancing a tray filled with empty, sticky pint glasses. Her expression was one of profound boredom, as if she had seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times before. The man wielding that blade was Aloisio Tuscano, known and feared along the entire East Coast as the Iron Dawn. He was a creature of immense power, a man who had famously destroyed entire family dynasties, burning them to absolute ash before he even had his morning espresso. He was waiting for her to beg. He was expecting her to cry or tremble in fear. What he got instead was a direct and unflinching stare. She met his predatory gaze with a look so cold it could make the depths of winter feel like a warm summer day. Martina shifted her weight, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and then she whispered 4 words. These 4 words would forever define her, marking her as either the most courageous woman in all of New Jersey or the most tragically suicidal. She looked him in the eye and said, "Don't you dare me." Now, before we go any deeper, imagine this: a lone waitress, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, staring down the most feared man on the entire East Coast, a man who has destroyed dynasties, and she tells him, "Don't you dare me." If your heart is already pounding, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, are you already on Team Martina? This is a story about a woman who discovered that true strength is not about hiding from your past, but about choosing when to step out of the shadows. It is a powerful reminder that the person you were trained to be does not have to be the person you become. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and finally stand your ground. So let's find out together exactly why Martina spoke those 4 incredibly dangerous words. Now, to understand her, we need to understand her world, a place called the Rusty Anchor. The thick, damp fog that rolled in off the Hudson River offered no comfort. It was a heavy blanket that only seemed to trap the smell of decay, making the rot of the docks even harder to breathe. The clock on the wall read 1:47 in the morning on a miserable Thursday. The Rusty Anchor, a sad little dive bar squeezed between a dusty pawn shop and a reeking fish processing plant on the Jersey docks, was clinging to its last few miserable souls. High in the front window, the neon Budweiser sign flickered erratically, like it was trying to spell out a warning in Morse code, telling everyone to get out while they still could. Martina Lori was wiping down the sticky bar top for what she was sure was the 100th time during her endless shift. She was only 24 years old, but she carried the kind of deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that felt like it had settled deep inside her bones. Her eyes were those of someone who had already watched her entire world burn down to nothing once before, and her hands were skilled in the art of making problems and people disappear. She was not looking for trouble or chaos. In fact, she was desperately hunting for the exact opposite. She was chasing invisibility, trying to earn just enough cash to get her younger sister, Sophia, to a new, safe city. All she truly wanted was one single night of uninterrupted sleep, a night where her years of intense training didn't wake her up in a cold sweat. But chaos has a nasty habit of hunting down the people who have been trained for it, the ones who used to be soldiers. The front door of the bar did not simply open, it made an announcement. The old hinges cried out with a loud groan that sounded like a painful confession, and a wave of cold air instantly dropped the temperature in the room by at least 5 degrees. 4 men walked inside. The 3 men who entered on the flanks were built like granite statues, dressed in expensive, dark overcoats. Their eyes were constantly moving, performing silent threat assessments on everything and everyone in the room as naturally as other people breathe. But it was the man who stood at the center of their formation who seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the air. It was Aloisio Toscano. Even Martina, who had spent the last 3 years perfecting the difficult art of knowing absolutely nothing about anyone, instantly recognized his infamous face. He had the aristocratic features of a Roman statue carved from fine Carrara marble, but his eyes were the disturbing color of old, dried blood. He wore a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored it likely cost more than the entire combined liquor inventory of the bar. He did not simply walk across the room. He moved with an aura of absolute ownership, claiming every single floorboard as if it were a newly conquered territory. He was the undisputed head of the Toscano crime syndicate, and he was currently orchestrating a brutal consolidation war that had transformed the entire eastern seaboard into a violent chessboard, one painted exclusively in shades of blood red. He made his way to the booth in the far corner, the strategic one that provided clear sightlines to both the front and back exits as well as the kitchen. His 2 primary enforcers, a pair of giants named Dante and Enzo, stationed themselves like guards near the dartboard and the silent jukebox. Martina let out a slow, controlled exhale through her nose, carefully tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, and then picked up a damp rag and a greasy menu. She did not hurry. More importantly, she did not hesitate for a single second. "Menu," she said, her voice flat as she slid it onto the scarred wooden tabletop. "We have whiskey that is cheaper, and a beer that pretty much tastes like the river. The kitchen has been closed for about an hour. It is your call." Aloisio finally looked up from the screen of his phone. He paused for a moment, appearing genuinely surprised by her directness. Usually people who approached him stammered and stuttered. Usually the bar's owner, a perpetually nervous wreck by the name of Mickey, would have already materialized out of thin air, offering profuse apologies and a round of free drinks for the entire table. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Aloisio asked. His voice was as smooth and rich as aged grappa, but it carried a dangerous edge, like a hidden razor blade. "I know that you are currently sitting in my section, which makes you my customer," Martina replied, her tone perfectly even and professional. "So, what will you drink?" Aloisio continued to study her, observing her with the intense focus of a man who had built a vast and powerful empire by being able to read people's deepest secrets. He saw no fear in her, no dilated pupils, not even the slightest tremor in her steady fingers. All he detected was a profound, bone-deep fatigue and the faintest hint of irritation, as if he were just another annoying customer who was guaranteed to never leave a tip. Martina's hands moved with practiced efficiency, pouring golden whiskey into 3 heavy glasses, while her mind was a million miles away, flickering back to a different bar, a different and much harder life. Suddenly, she was 12 years old again. She was standing in her father's mahogany study, back in Providence, Rhode Island, learning how to field strip a Glock pistol long before she ever learned basic algebra. Her father, Vincenzo Laurier, was not interested in raising a daughter. He was meticulously forging a weapon. Again, he had said sternly, his eyes never leaving the morning newspaper. Do it faster. Her small fingers had trembled with the effort, but then, after countless repetitions, they did not tremble anymore. The training he put her through had been constant and utterly relentless. He disguised brutal hand-to-hand combat lessons as formal dance classes. He taught her complex tactical planning by hiding the lessons inside innocent games of chess. He taught her advanced surveillance techniques by having her spend hours people watching at crowded outdoor cafes. By the time she was 16 years old, Martina could vanish into any crowd. She could read the dangers in a room in less than 3 seconds. And she knew how to break a grown man's wrist in 2 swift, efficient moves. She was created to be her father's ultimate insurance policy, his secret ace in the hole to be used against the other powerful families that were always circling his operations like hungry sharks in the water. And then the fire came. Even now, she could still smell it in her nightmares, the acrid scent of gasoline and burning oak wood, the sweet smell of her mother's favorite perfume as it turned into black smoke. The rival Calibri family had sent a clear and brutal message that night, painting it in roaring flames across the front of their beautiful colonial home on Federal Hill. Martina only survived because her father had violently shoved her through a small, grimy basement window. His final words to her were not, "I love you," but a desperate command, "Run, be no one." She had crawled out into the cold November rain, completely alone, watching as her entire world, everything she had ever known and loved, collapsed into a pile of glowing embers. In that moment, she made herself a solemn promise. The girl who knew 30 different ways to kill a man had died in that fire. Only a ghost of who she was had walked away from the ashes. For the next 3 long years, she drifted like a phantom through the bleak industrial underbelly of New Jersey. She worked as a waitress in Neptune, she bussed dirty tables in Hoboken, and she cleaned cheap motel rooms in Atlantic City. She constantly changed her hair color, she adopted a slight, convincing limp, and she always wore baggy clothes that were 2 sizes too big for her. She made herself completely invisible, becoming just another forgotten, exhausted woman, grinding her way through endless double shifts, as unremarkable and easy to ignore as the morning fog. The rusty anchor was supposed to be her final stop before she disappeared from the world for good. She had saved nearly enough money to move her sister Sophia all the way out to Portland, Oregon. There, she would buy them both brand new names and a quiet life where the violent past would stay buried forever. Martina carefully placed the 3 whiskey glasses on Aloysio's table, her own tired reflection briefly appearing like a ghost across the surface of the dark liquid. For a fleeting, painful second, she saw her father's disappointed eyes staring back at her, judging her for choosing mere survival over honor, over vengeance, over the family legacy he had built. "Will there be anything else?" she asked Aloysio, her voice carefully controlled and completely flat. But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel the old, familiar instincts beginning to fire deep within her. She had already mentally cataloged the weapons his men were carrying. She had identified all of the primary and secondary exit routes, and she had calculated the safest defensive angles from her current position. After 3 long years of playing dead, her father's brutal training still pulsed just beneath her skin, a relentless second heartbeat that she could never truly silence. The ghost was getting so tired of haunting only herself. Aloisio Tuscano returned to the bar 3 nights later. This time, he came completely alone, a decision which was either a supreme display of power or a blatant death wish. Martina was busy refilling the large ice bin behind the bar when the front door opened at exactly 2:13 in the morning. This was long after last call, well after her boss, Mickey, had stumbled his way home in a drunken haze, and after the thick fog had transformed the silent docks into a scene from a chilling ghost story. "We are closed," she said without even bothering to turn around. "The sign on your door says you are open 24 hours. His voice was sharp and clear, cutting through the silence of the empty bar like expensive cologne, slicing through the smell of diesel fumes. "That sign has been broken since 2019, Martina said, as she finally straightened up, the heavy metal ice scoop still clutched tightly in her hand. "What is it that you want, Mr. Toscano?" He chose to sit at the bar this time, not in the secluded booth. This was closer, much more intimate. His suit was different, but just as immaculate as the last one. A deep navy blue this time, worn with a silk tie that probably cost more than her beat-up car. "I am here to offer you a job." Martina let out a laugh. It was a sharp, bitter sound completely devoid of any humor. "I already have a job, thanks. The tips are absolutely terrible, but on the bright side, at least nobody is actively trying to recruit me into their organized crime family." "I am not recruiting you into anything," Aloisio said calmly. He folded his large hands on the polished bar top, and for the first time, she noticed that his knuckles were covered in faint, pale scars that stood out against his expensive manicure. "I am offering you a position as a consultant. You would be doing security assessments for me. The pay is $20,000 a month, in cash." Her first instinct was to say no immediately. She should have thrown him out of her bar, called the police, and then run as fast and as far as she could. But instead, to her own surprise, she heard herself ask the dangerous question, "Why me?" "Because 4 nights ago, while my highly trained men were busy scanning this room for obvious threats, you were the one who clocked the spotter, positioned across the street, before any of us even knew he was there." He tilted his head just slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You mentally mapped out the exit routes, you correctly identified the concealed firearms on 2 of my personal bodyguards, and you positioned yourself in a location that gave you perfect sight lines to both the kitchen and the front door. That is not the instinct of a waitress, Martina. That is the result of extensive training." A wave of ice-cold dread washed over Martina. Her blood felt like it was freezing in her veins. She had been so incredibly careful, so painstakingly invisible, for so very long. "I have no idea what you are talking about," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Martina Lori, the daughter of Vincenzo Lori, who was the former consigliere to the powerful Marchetti family. You were presumed to be dead in the Federal Hill fire back in 2021, Aloisio stated, his eyes completely flat and analytical. "You have been living as a ghost for 3 years. That is very impressive, but I do not need another killer. I already have plenty of those. What I need is someone like you, someone who sees the things that other people miss. I need someone who has no pulse when everyone else around them is panicking." She gripped the metal ice scoop so hard that her knuckles turned white and the edges dug painfully into her palm. "And what happens if I say no to your generous offer?" "Then you will continue pouring cheap drinks in this sad little bar and looking over your shoulder for the rest of your very short life," he said matter-of-factly. He then slid a small, black burner phone across the smooth surface of the bar. "The Calibri family has just recently expanded their operations into New Jersey. It is only a matter of time before they find you. The only real question is whether you want to face them as a terrified waitress or as someone who has the full protection of the Iron Dawn." The untraceable phone sat on the bar between them, feeling as heavy and as dangerous as a loaded gun. Martina spent 2 agonizing days just staring at that burner phone, weighing her impossible options before she finally made the call. Aloysio's instructions were simple and direct. He told her to meet him at Carbone's, a legendary Italian restaurant in New York City, where powerful politicians ate expensive pasta and deliberately pretended not to see the high-level mobsters dining just 2 tables away. She made sure to arrive a full 20 minutes early, wearing the only dress she owned that did not permanently smell like the deep fryer's grease, and she was immediately overwhelmed by the desire to turn around and leave. The magnificent crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling probably cost more than her entire annual salary. She knew she did not belong in a place like this, surrounded by pristine white tablecloths and wine lists that were thicker than the lease agreement for her tiny apartment. Aloisio was already seated at a quiet table in the back, predictably flanked by his men. The names of the 2 men by the door were Dante and Enzo. The man they protected, Aloisio, rose to his feet as Martina approached. He saw a contradiction in her, a woman whose movements held the grace of a forgotten era, but whose eyes held the coldness of modern violence. He gestured to the empty chair across the table. "You came," he observed, his voice a low rumble. "I am here to decline your offer in person," Martina replied, the lie sliding smoothly from her lips as she took the seat. But her mind was already at work, her eyes sweeping the room, taking inventory with a cold precision her father had literally beaten into her. A couple at table 4 were celebrating an anniversary. A businessman at the bar was on his 3rd drink, the faint white line on his ring finger screaming of recent separation. The waiter near the kitchen door stood too straight, the posture of a former soldier. Aloisio's own protection was visible, 2 men at the entrance, and another guarding the path to the restrooms. But the real problem was at table 7. A man in a navy jacket sat in the corner, holding a newspaper far too high. He had not turned a single page in over 6 minutes. She was watching Aloisio's face, not directly, but in the distorted reflection of a pyramid of wine glasses stacked on the bar. Her heartbeat remained slow and steady. Her expression was a perfect mask of calm indifference. The only sign of her awareness was a subtle movement of her hand, shifting her water glass to a slightly different angle on the table. "You are being watched," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as she lifted the glass to her lips. "He is in a navy jacket, wearing brown shoes. I would bet he is armed. It is definitely a surveillance operation." She took a slow sip of water before continuing. "He has been staring at the same page of that newspaper since the moment I arrived." Dante, one of Aloisio's men, heard her, and his hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his jacket. Aloisio stopped him with a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, a flick of his fingers that Martina nearly missed herself. "Are you certain?" Aloisio asked. His tone was completely casual, as if he were merely commenting on the evening's weather. "Look at his reflection," Martina instructed quietly. "Use the glass pyramid behind you. He has been sitting in a restaurant for half an hour and has not looked at his phone even once." She let the observation hang in the air. In this day and age, nobody does that unless they are on the job. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Aloisio's face. It was the expression of a predator that had just been shown new prey. He made another tiny gesture. His man, Enzo, stood up from his post. He walked casually past table 7, then stumbled just enough to bump the man's chair. The man in the jacket reacted instantly, his hand dropping to his waistband to check his weapon, a trained reflex he could not suppress. Realizing his mistake, he tried to cover the motion, but it was too late. Enzo calmly returned to his position. Aloisio leaned back in his chair, now studying Martina with a new level of intensity, as if she were a pawn that had suddenly and unexpectedly captured his queen. "My men have been by my side for 15 years, Aloisio said. his voice a low murmur of disbelief. They did not see him. Martina met his gaze directly, her own eyes unblinking. That is because they were searching for immediate threats, for weapons and aggressive moves. I was searching for patterns that were out of place. She let him absorb the difference in their methods. Waitresses learn how to see the customers who are not really customers. It is a survival skill. The question came after a long moment of silence. When can you start? She had used the entire first week to embed herself within his security detail, not as a participant, but as an observer. She watched his daily routines, memorized his habits, and identified every single one of his vulnerabilities. A coup was on the horizon. She could sense it. It was in the anxious energy that radiated from his underbosses during meetings. She could see it in the deliberate way certain soldiers would avoid, but making eye contact with him. Someone was planning a move against the man they called the Iron Dawn, and she knew that when it happened, it would not be a clean or honorable affair. Their first real training session took place in a warehouse in Elizabeth, a place that reeked of rust and secrets buried for decades. "Take off the jacket," she ordered, her voice echoing in the vast space. Aloisio simply raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Your enemies are not going to send you a formal invitation to a duel at 20 paces," she explained. "They will corner you in a dark parking garage or a bathroom or some place where your bodyguards cannot get to you in time. Your power has to work when the expensive suit cannot protect you." He removed his jacket, folded it with perfect precision, and placed it on a dusty crate. "The first lesson is simple," Martina said, her voice coming from directly behind him. "Someone grabs you from the dark. Tell me what you do next." His answer was quick and arrogant. "I do not get grabbed." Her arm locked around his throat, a sudden band of steel. "You just got grabbed. All your men are dead, or worse, they have been paid off. It is just you. So tell me." "Now what?" he fought back, but he moved all wrong, aiming too high, relying on brute force. "No," Martina's voice was sharp. She released him and pushed him away. "You fight like a rich man who learned self-defense in a clean, padded gym. Street fighting is about survival. It is about causing so much pain that your attacker regrets the moment they laid a hand on you." She showed him, a heel stomped on the instep, designed to shatter bone. An elbow slammed into the solar plexus, fingers jabbed toward the eyes. First you create pain, then you create shock, then you escape. That is the order. By the time they were finished, Aloisio's expensive shirt was untucked and stained with sweat. His knuckles were scraped and bleeding, and his normally perfect hair was a complete mess. He no longer looked like a powerful Don who commanded an empire. He looked like a man who had clawed his way out of the same dark gutter as his most dangerous enemies. "Again," he said, breathing hard, but his voice was completely steady. A faint smile touched Martina's lips, but then something unexpected happened. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with a look she had never seen from him before. It was not the calculating gaze of a crime boss. It was something raw and unguarded. "My father used to say the same thing," he said quietly. "Again, always again." He was a bricklayer in Naples. He built this empire with hands that were never clean. For a fraction of a second, the Iron Dawn was gone, replaced by a boy who still remembered calloused hands and the smell of wet cement. Martina felt something dangerous stir inside her chest. Not attraction, she told herself. Recognition. She recognized the weight of a father's impossible expectations. She knew what it meant to be shaped into something you never chose to become. That was the moment she realized this arrangement was going to be far more complicated than she had planned. Now, if you can already feel that dangerous tension building between these two powerful souls, You need to understand that everything is about to escalate in ways you cannot imagine. The Iron Dawn has just shown his most guarded secret to a woman who was trained to exploit weakness. But instead of using it against him, something inside her shifted. The question is, was that the smartest decision she ever made, or the most dangerous? Stay with me, because what happens next at the charity gala will redefine everything. The gown she was given to wear was made of midnight blue silk, and it cost more money than Martina had earned in 6 entire months of serving drinks. The dress fit her as if it had been meticulously crafted for her body and her body alone, which of course it had. Aloisio was not a man who did anything halfway. She stared at the woman in the full-length mirror of the hotel suite and could barely recognize her own reflection. "I look utterly ridiculous," she muttered, instinctively tugging at the gown's unfamiliar neckline. "You look dangerous," Aloisio's voice corrected her from the doorway. He was dressed in full formal attire, a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made him look like a product of old money and even older sins. "Which is precisely the point," he continued. "The Baldini family is the host of this charity gala tonight. At least half of the most powerful families on the East Coast will be in attendance. They will be circling me like sharks in the water, waiting for any sign of weakness." Martina turned away from the mirror to face him, and the silk dress moved with her, flowing like liquid shadow across the floor. "So what exactly is my role in all of this? Am I just arm candy for the evening? A beautiful distraction?" He slowly crossed the room toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached out and made a small adjustment to the diamond necklace she wore, a piece on loan that was probably worth more than a small country. His fingers brushed the hollow of her throat for just a moment, and Martina's breath caught. Not because she was afraid, because she was not afraid, and that terrified her more than any weapon ever could. "You are a message," he said softly. "You are the woman who can stand right next to the Iron Dawn and not show a single trace of fear. Your presence alone will make them wonder what you know, what you are capable of, and most importantly, why I trust you enough to bring you with me into the lion's den." Beneath the luxurious silk, she could feel the familiar, comforting weight of the ceramic blade pressed against her inner thigh. She had insisted on it, and it was now secured in a custom sheath sewn directly into the gown. The dress might have been nothing more than a costume for the evening, but the knife she carried was devastatingly real. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel represented everything in the world that Martina despised. It was a cavern of excess, filled with massive crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne fountains, and people who wore their immense wealth like it was a suit of armor. She recognized several faces from Federal Bureau of Investigation wanted posters. They were casually mingling with United States senators and chief executive officers, and everyone was pretending that the blood staining their money had long since dried and washed away. Aloisio's hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture that was possessive but not controlling. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking their every move, assessing them, calculating, and wondering about her. It was not long before Antonio Baldini himself approached them. He was a man with silver hair and the smooth, deadly grace of a serpent, his welcoming smile never quite reaching his cold, empty eyes. "Aloisio," Baldini began, his voice like oiled silk, "who is this lovely creature you have brought with you tonight?" "This is Martina Loriapo," Aloisio answered, and as he spoke her name, she saw a flicker of recognition in Baldini's eyes. He knew the name. He knew who her father was. "She is my new consultant." Later they danced, because in their world, refusing a dance would be seen as a sign of weakness. Martina moved through the steps of the waltz on pure muscle memory, her mind detached and alert. Her father's voice echoed in her head, repeating the lessons he had drilled into her. Always know your exits. Always keep your weapon hand-free. As they turned across the floor, her eyes scanned the crowd, automatically identifying three potential threats. She spotted two men with concealed firearms and a server who moved with the distinct, efficient gait of a former Russian Special Forces soldier. "You are scanning the room," Aloisio murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Someone in this ballroom wants you dead," she replied quietly. "Probably several someones, if I am being honest." He guided her through another turn, his grip firm, and for one dangerous second, she allowed herself to lean into it, just slightly, before she caught herself. "And yet, you are still here, dancing with me," he said. Her hand tightened for a fraction of a second on his shoulder. "A knife has two sharp edges, Don Aloisio. Have you forgotten?" His laugh was a low, genuine sound, and it was filled with danger. "No," he said. "That is precisely why you are here." The call that changed everything came at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 days after the gala. Martina was at the safe house in Hoboken, analyzing security footage from the event, when her personal phone began to buzz. It was a phone only two other people in the world had the number for. A video call appeared on the screen from a blocked number. Her sister's face, pale and terrified, filled the screen. Sophia was only 17. Duct tape was stretched cruelly across her mouth, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. The background behind her was bleak and terrifying, bare concrete walls and the harsh glare of industrial lighting. She was in a basement, or perhaps a tomb. "Hello, Martina," a voice said. The voice was horribly familiar. It belonged to Carmine Russo, Aloisio's trusted underboss, the man who had been his second-in-command for the last decade. The camera then shifted to show Carmine's face, his expression a sickening mask of false sympathy that barely concealed his raw ambition. "Or should I be calling you the ghost of Vincenzo Laurier's daughter?" And this is the moment that broke her. Martina's hand, the hand that had not trembled when a knife was pressed to her throat, the hand that had been steady through every fight and every nightmare for 3 long years, that hand began to shake. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers. A sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a sob, a sound she had not made since the night she crawled through that basement window and watched her home burn. For 5 agonizing seconds, Martina Laurie was not a ghost, not a weapon, not a soldier. She was just a 24-year-old girl watching her baby sister cry and knowing it was entirely her fault. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall of the safe house and squeezed her eyes shut. Her body shook with the effort of holding herself together. And then, like a switch being flipped deep inside her chest, something ancient and cold took over. Her breathing steadied. Her hands went still. When she opened her eyes again, they were completely empty. The girl was gone. The ghost was back, and the ghost was furious. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice now flat as a blade. "She is somewhere very uncomfortable," Carmine replied smoothly. "But she can walk out of that place completely unharmed on one condition. You must do exactly what I tell you to do." Carmine leaned closer to the camera, his smile now looking like a fresh knife wound. "Tomorrow night, Aloisio has a private meeting scheduled at the yacht club. The security will be minimal. It will be just you and him. You are going to put 2 bullets directly into his head. Then you will walk away, and your sister will be delivered to you, ready to start whatever new life you have been planning for her." "Why me?" Martina asked, her voice a dead monotone. "Because you are close enough to him now that he will never see it coming," Carmine explained. Because you are skilled enough to completely disappear afterward. And because he punctuated his final point by grabbing Sophia's hair and yanking her head back, forcing a muffled whimper of pain from behind the tape. You do not have a choice. The call ended abruptly. Martina sat alone in the darkness for exactly 90 seconds. She allowed the last remnants of that wave of panic to settle, and then she drowned them in ice-cold, methodical calculation. Carmine Russo thought he understood her completely. He believed she was still the same desperate woman he had found serving drinks, a woman who would do anything to protect her younger sister. He had no idea that she had spent the last 3 years meticulously transforming herself into something else entirely. She opened her encrypted contact list on a separate device and found the emergency number Aloisio had given her, a number he had told her to use only in the most dire of circumstances. He answered the call on the very first ring. "We have a problem," she stated, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Carmine Russo has my sister. He wants me to kill you tomorrow night at the yacht club." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Aloisio's voice came, low and steady. "Are you going to do it?" "No," she replied without a moment's hesitation. "But he does not know that yet." An idea was already forming in the depths of her mind, a blueprint for something incredibly risky, a plan born from sheer desperation. She looked at him, her voice low. "How much do you really trust me?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Enough to hear what you have to say." "Good," she said, a grim determination setting in. "Then we are going to give Carmine the exact betrayal he is counting on. We will play our parts perfectly, right up to the moment we flip the entire board." The scheduled meeting at the fancy yacht club was nothing more than a ghost, a distraction designed to draw all eyes in the wrong direction. The real stage for this play was set 3 miles to the south, deep within the confusing, industrial labyrinth of the Bayonne docks. This was Martina's old territory, a place where she had spent 3 long years memorizing every single shadow, every crumbling warehouse, and every single rusted shipping container that could either conceal a threat or offer a chance at survival. As expected, Carmine swallowed the bait completely, like a starving fish lunging at a hook. His team of operatives had been meticulously tracking Martina's mobile phone, observing her every move and seeing a perfectly crafted illusion. They saw precisely what she needed them to see. They witnessed a woman who appeared broken, going through the expected motions of a turncoat. What their surveillance completely missed was the second phone, the one operating on a deeply encrypted network. They had no idea about the complex coordination happening on frequencies they did not even know existed. At the stroke of midnight, Martina stood alone on Pier 19. She was dressed in her old, worn-out waitress uniform, a deliberate choice to make her seem small and insignificant under the unsteady flicker of a single lonely streetlight. 50 feet away, concealed by the oppressive darkness, Aloisio played his role as the dead man walking. Scattered around them, his most loyal soldiers, the men Carmine's poison had failed to corrupt, were hidden inside the containers, waiting like silent ghosts. Carmine's arrival shattered the quiet, his motorcade of 4 black sedans approaching with headlights that sliced through the thick, damp fog. He stepped out of his car with a broad smile, radiating an air of supreme confidence, already envisioning his victory and the power that would come with it. His men roughly shoved Sophia out of the car after him. She was still bound with zip ties, her eyes wide with terror. "A smart girl," Carmine's voice boomed across the pier, laced with smug satisfaction. "I had a feeling you would eventually see things my way. Family always comes first, does it not?" With a steady hand, Martina raised the heavy pistol. It was Aloisio's own weapon, the very gun she was supposed to use to execute him. "Let my sister go first," she demanded. "After," Carmine countered. "First, show me the body. Then your sister is free to go." This was the critical moment, the single point on which everything would turn. Martina pivoted, aiming the weapon into the deep darkness, where Aloisio was concealed, and pulled the trigger 3 distinct times. The brilliant flash from the muzzle tore through the night, illuminating the scene in a series of stark, brief snapshots. A body crumpled to the ground with a heavy thud. Carmine let out a triumphant, booming laugh. "You see? That was not so difficult, was it?" And then the lights came on. All of them, enormous floodlights mounted on every container, inside every warehouse, and on every vehicle Martina had meticulously positioned over the last 72 hours, suddenly blazed to life. The docks were instantly transformed into a brilliantly lit stage. In that shocking moment, Carmine and his men found themselves completely exposed, caught in the open, and hopelessly surrounded. They were massively outgunned. Aloisio rose to his feet from the spot where he had fallen, calmly brushing concrete dust from the shoulders of his expensive jacket. The fake blood pack concealed beneath his shirt had burst flawlessly, creating a very realistic effect. He smiled, but it was the predatory grin of a shark. "The thing you should know about ghosts," Martina said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence as she now trained her gun directly on Carmine, "is that we have become experts at playing dead." The entire confrontation was finished in less than 90 seconds. Carmine's men, quickly comprehending that they were trapped inside an inescapable kill box, immediately dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The few who hesitated learned a brutal lesson about why you never back desperate men into a corner on their home turf. Martina walked calmly over to Sophia, sliced through her bonds with a small knife, and held her younger sister tightly while she sobbed with relief. She pressed her face into Sophia's hair and whispered, "I've got you. Nobody is ever going to touch you again. I promise." Looking over Sophia's shoulder, her eyes met Aloisio's across the pier. Something passed between them in that look. Something neither of them was ready to name. The ghost had finally stopped running from her past. Now, she was the one who ruled the graveyard. But the problem with cleaning house is that you can never be certain you have gotten everyone. Carmine had a cousin who belonged to the powerful Baldini family. His name was Marco, a man whose ambition far outstripped his common sense, and who unfortunately had access to military-grade chemical agents. He decided to make his move 2 weeks after the incident at the docks, during the victory celebration held aboard Aloisio's magnificent yacht, the Fortuna, which was anchored just off the coast of Sandy Hook. Martina noticed it in Marco's eyes just before the celebratory champagne flute could even touch Aloisio's lips. It was a fleeting flash of deep satisfaction, the unmistakable look of premature victory. She crossed the crowded deck in 3 powerful strides, her body moving with pure instinct. She slammed the delicate glass from Aloisio's hand just in time. It shattered violently against the polished teakwood deck, the expensive champagne mixing with a clear liquid that carried the faint, telltale smell of bitter almonds. It was a cyanide derivative, incredibly fast-acting and lethal within a matter of minutes. "Get below deck right now," she commanded Aloisio, her voice sharp and urgent. In that same instant, Marco's hand darted inside his suit jacket, reaching for a weapon. At the same time, 3 other men, Marco's hidden soldiers, scattered among the celebrating crew, also made their move. They were wolves hiding in plain sight, but Martina's pistol was already in her hand, the barrel aimed squarely at Marco's chest. "Do not do it," her voice was cold and steady. Marco just smiled. You are outnumbered, Waitress, he sneered. Count again, she replied. At her signal, Dante and Enzo moved into perfect flanking position. But there were still far too many innocent people on the deck, and they were surrounded by an endless ocean with absolutely nowhere to run. With a single decisive action, Martina shot out the main deck lights. Complete darkness instantly consumed the yacht. She began to move based purely on instinct and the 3 years of relentless training her father had forced upon her. Her muscle memory was now sharper and faster than conscious thought. The first of Marco's guards went down with a crushed trachea, a silent and permanent end to his threat. The second man caught her elbow directly in his temple, and he was rendered unconscious before his body even hit the deck. Gunfire erupted from the darkness, followed by screams of panic and chaos. Martina used the pandemonium to her advantage, becoming a part of the storm, a deadly ghost moving through the blackness. She located Marco as he was desperately trying to make his way to the small speedboat tied to the yacht. Her knife, the ceramic blade she had carried since the gala, found its mark in his kidney. The wound was not fatal, but it was more than enough to incapacitate him. "Where is the antidote?" she hissed in his ear. Her voice a low growl. "There is not one," he gasped. She applied more pressure to the blade. "Then you are going to die very slowly." That broke him. He told her everything. It was in his inside jacket pocket, a small blue vial containing an activated charcoal suspension. It was his personal insurance policy, just in case he was ever accidentally exposed. Martina left him bleeding on the deck and found Aloisio in the galley. He was already showing the early symptoms of the poison: an elevated heart rate and dangerously dilated pupils. She quickly forced the antidote down his throat. From that point on, her forgotten nursing training took complete control. She carefully monitored his vital signs, helped control his breathing, and worked tirelessly to keep him conscious while the charcoal compound worked to absorb the deadly poison. In those 20 agonizing minutes before the Coast Guard arrived, something shifted between them that could never be undone. His hand found hers in the dim light of the galley, and he held on with a grip that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with fear. Not fear of dying, fear of losing the one person who had made him feel human again. "Stay with me," she said. And she was not sure if she meant stay conscious or something else entirely. When the Coast Guard's flashing lights finally illuminated the scene of bodies and chaos on the deck, Aloisio sat up slowly, the color finally returning to his face. He looked at Martina as if he were truly seeing her for the very first time. "You are not my consultant anymore," he said, his voice firm. Martina's body tensed, unsure of what was coming next. "You are my partner." The rusty anchor sign on the front of the bar looked much smaller than Martina remembered. 3 full months had passed since the terrifying night on the yacht, since Marco's failed takeover attempt, and since she had finally stopped pretending to be a nobody. The old neon sign still flickered erratically, blinking out its dying Morse code message to the street. The front door still groaned like a painful confession every time it was opened, but now she saw the place completely differently. It was no longer a place to hide, but a place where a new chapter had begun. Mickey was standing behind the bar, dutifully wiping down the same scarred wooden counter that he had probably cleaned over 1,000 times before. He glanced up as she walked in, then did a visible double-take when he saw the woman standing before him. She was dressed in a tailored wool coat and wore a pair of expensive leather boots. "Martina, Jesus Christ, I honestly thought you were dead, or that you had just disappeared. Maybe you were in witness protection." She offered a small, knowing smile as she pulled a thick manila envelope from her jacket. "It was none of the above, Mickey. I am here because I want to make you an offer. The entire transaction, all the paperwork, took less than 20 minutes to complete. Mickey signed the documents with hands that were visibly shaking, likely wondering if he even had the option to refuse. He did. Martina was not her father. She was not the monster that she had been trained to become. But Mickey was drowning in a sea of debt and a lifetime of bad decisions, and she was offering him a lifeboat. It was a lifeboat that came with a number so large it made his eyes water. After he left, Martina stood by herself in the now empty bar. She ran her hand slowly along the worn surface of the counter, remembering the woman who had hidden in this very place. She remembered the person who poured drinks and always kept her head down, the person who once believed that being invisible was the same thing as being safe. Her fingers paused on a small burn mark in the wood, a scar from a cigarette someone had left behind years ago. She traced its edges, and for one quiet moment, she missed that invisible woman. That woman had been terrified, yes, but she had also been innocent. The woman standing here now had blood on her hands. She had made choices that could never be unmade. She had become the very thing her father had designed her to be, and the terrifying truth was that she was extraordinary at it. The door groaned open again. Aloisio stepped inside, surveying the small space with the same sharp, analytical eye that he applied to every aspect of his life. He had wanted to send his team of lawyers and accountants, a group of professionals, to handle the entire transaction. She had refused his offer. This was something she needed to do for herself. "Feeling sentimental?" he asked, taking a seat at the bar. "No, practical," Martina replied, but her voice was quieter than usual. She reached up and took 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive whiskey from the top shelf. It was her bar now, and this was her liquor. Sophia needs a legitimate business that she can run while she finishes up her degree at school. We cannot have the sister of the Iron Dawn's new partner slinging drinks in some other person's dive bar. And so, the Rusty Anchor will become a front, a private meeting place, a secure safe house. She slid one of the glasses across the counter to him. "It will be everything it already was for me, but now we are just being honest about its purpose." Aloisio raised his drink in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to old ghosts finally being laid to rest." Martina clinked her glass against his. She felt the familiar burn of the expensive whiskey as it went down. She felt the heavy weight of the decision she had made and had finally come to accept. "You know what my father would say if he could see me now," she said, staring at the amber liquid in her glass. Aloisio waited. "He would say I finally stopped running, and then he would tell me to run faster, because the moment you stop running in this world, you become a target." She took another sip. "The difference is, I am done listening to dead men." Outside, a thick fog was rolling in from the Hudson River, but for the first time in 3 long years, Martina was not disappearing into it. She was standing directly in the light, embracing the fire and all, exactly where she was always meant to be. The girl who had died twice had finally learned how to truly live. But somewhere, in the quietest corner of her mind, a small voice whispered a question she would never answer out loud. Had she truly escaped her father's shadow? Or had she simply learned to cast one of her own? What an absolutely incredible journey we have just witnessed together, everyone. We watched Martina transform from a woman hiding in the shadows to one who now commands the light. She went from serving cheap drinks to serving her own brand of justice. But here's the question I cannot stop thinking about, and I need to hear your answer. Did Martina make the right choice by becoming Aloisio's partner? Did she escape her past, or did she walk right back into the same darkness wearing a more expensive dress? That is the beauty of this story. There is no simple answer. If you love this incredible story of resilience as much as I do, please take a moment to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more amazing tales of survival, hard-won redemption, and the most unexpected alliances. Make sure you turn on your notifications so that you never miss a single episode from this channel. And please, comment below and let me know, what was your absolute favorite moment? Was it the terrifying knife scene in the bar? Was it the moment Martina broke down when she saw Sophia on that video call? Was it the lights coming on at the docks? Or was it that final whiskey toast between two people who were never supposed to trust each other? I read every single comment, and your thoughts mean the entire world to this channel. Thank you so much for being here with me today. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons to our audience.